The Great Hall of the Galactic Conclave was larger than any building on Earth. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds formed near the top. Light came from crystals that floated in the air, casting everything in a cold blue glow. Beings from hundreds of different worlds filled the seats that circled the central platform. Some had scales, some had feathers, some had no bodies at all, just shapes made of light and energy. Ambassador Daniel Carter stood alone on the platform. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent 30 years in the diplomatic service, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Behind him, through a quantum relay that connected to every screen on Earth, 6 billion people watched and waited. The High Arbiters sat on thrones made of living crystal. There were 7 of them, and they belonged to a species so old that no one remembered their original name. Their bodies were thin and pale, almost transparent, and their eyes glowed with a light that seemed to see through everything. Chief Arbiter Thessalax raised one long hand, and the hall fell silent. Species designation, human, Thessalax announced. The voice was strange, like metal scraping against glass. Origin world, Earth, Sol system, galactic age, 3 standard years since first contact. Status review is now complete. Daniel felt his heart beating fast, but he kept his face calm. Humanity had done everything right. They had followed every rule. They had answered every question honestly. They had opened their world to inspection teams and shared their history without hiding anything. Thessalax continued. The Conclave has studied your species carefully. We have examined your biology, your culture, your technology, and your history. We have reached a decision. The hall was completely quiet. Even the beings made of light seemed to hold still. Humanity is hereby classified as a Category 7 species. You are given quarantine status. Your exile from galactic civilization is permanent and begins immediately. For a moment, Daniel could not move. Category 7 was the worst classification possible. It was reserved for species that the Conclave considered too dangerous, too violent, or too unpredictable to exist among other civilizations. It meant complete isolation, no trade, no communication, no travel beyond their own star system. A fleet would be stationed at the edge of their space to make sure they never left. Sounds of approval came from many parts of the hall. Some species had clearly expected this, others seemed surprised, and a few even looked uncomfortable with the decision. Daniel stepped forward. May I speak? Thessalax tilted his ancient head. You may ask one question. On what grounds has this decision been made? What crime has humanity committed? The Chief Arbiter's glowing eyes seemed to brighten. Crime? You misunderstand. This is not punishment. This is prevention. We have studied your history, Ambassador. Your species developed nuclear weapons before you achieved peace on your own world. You have fought 2 global wars and countless smaller ones. You kill each other over differences in belief, over lines drawn on maps, over resources you could easily share. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but Thessalax continued. Your technology advances faster than your wisdom. You split the atom before you learned to feed all your children. You reached for the stars while you still pointed weapons at each other. Every projection we have made shows the same result. If humanity is allowed to spread beyond your system, you will bring war to the galaxy. You will destabilize civilizations that have been peaceful for thousands of years. This we cannot allow. We are capable of change, Daniel said. We have changed. The world that built nuclear weapons is not the world that stands before you today. Perhaps, but the risk is too great. The Conclave has seen promising species fall into violence before. We have learned that it is better to contain the fire before it spreads than to try to put it out after it has burned everything. A being from one of the nearby seats stood up. It was tall and covered in blue scales, with 4 arms and a face that showed something like pity. May I speak in favor of the humans? The decision has been made. Thessalak said coldly. There will be no debate. Then may I at least ask about an appeal process? There is no appeal. Humanity's exile is permanent. This is the will of the conclave. The blue-scaled being sat down slowly, and Daniel saw frustration in its alien eyes. At least someone here had tried to help them. Thesalax raised his hand again. The exile begins in 30 standard rotations. This gives humanity time to recall any vessels beyond their system and to prepare for permanent isolation. After 30 rotations, a patrol fleet will take position at the boundary of your space. Any human vessel found beyond that boundary will be destroyed without warning. Any attempt to communicate with other species will be blocked. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. Daniel felt anger rising in his chest, but he pushed it down. Getting angry now would only prove their point about humans being dangerous. Is that all? He asked, keeping his voice steady. That is all. You may return to your world, Ambassador. Make the most of your 30 days. Daniel turned and walked toward the exit. The hall was filled with the sounds of aliens talking among themselves. Some were pleased, some were indifferent. A few seemed troubled by what had just happened. His aide, a young woman named Katie Morgan, met him at the door. She was pale and her hands were shaking, but her voice was firm. Sir, what do we do now? Daniel looked back at the great hall one last time. The High Arbiters had already moved on to other business, as if the fate of humanity was just another item on their schedule. We go home, he said quietly, and then we get to work. Get to work on what? Daniel started walking toward their ship. They think they know what humans are. They think they can predict what we will do. They have studied our wars and our weapons and our worst moments, and they have decided that is all we are. Katie hurried to keep up with him. They are not entirely wrong, sir. We have done terrible things. Yes, we have. But that is not all we have done. Daniel stopped and turned to face her. Katie, do you know what humans do when someone tells us we cannot do something? When someone puts us in a cage and says we must stay there forever? Katie thought about it. She thought about every time in human history when people had been told to accept their place, to stay where they belonged, to give up and stop fighting. We find a way out, she said. Daniel nodded. We find a way out, or we make one. The Conclave has given us 30 days to prepare for exile. They think that is enough time for us to accept our fate. He smiled, and there was something hard in his eyes. They have no idea what humans can do in 30 days when we have no other choice. They boarded their ship and began the long journey home. Behind them, the Galactic Conclave continued its business, confident that the human problem had been solved. They would soon learn how wrong they were. Part 2. The 30 Days. The news hit Earth like a wave. Every screen, every phone, every radio carried the same message. Humanity had been judged and found wanting. The stars were closed to them forever. For the first few hours, there was chaos. People gathered in the streets, some crying, some angry, some simply standing in shock. Governments held emergency meetings. Stock markets crashed. Religious leaders called for prayer. Scientists sat in silence, watching their dreams of exploring the universe turn to dust. But then something strange happened, something the Conclave had not predicted. Humanity stopped fighting with itself. In Geneva, Secretary General Nathan Price stood before the United Nations. The assembly hall was full, with every nation represented. For the first time in history, there were no empty seats, and no one was absent. We have been given a choice, Nathan said. His voice was calm but strong. We can accept this exile. We can turn inward, blame each other, and spend our remaining years fighting over the scraps of a planet we have already damaged. Or we can do something else. He paused and looked around the room. Leaders who had been enemies for decades sat side by side, united by a common threat. They called us divided. They called us tribal. They said we cannot stop fighting among ourselves. Nathan leaned forward. I say we prove them wrong. Not with words, with action. By the end of that day, every nation on Earth had signed the Sol Compact. It was the first truly global agreement in human history. Borders remained, but they became lines on a map rather than walls between enemies. Resources were shared. Knowledge was pooled. For the first time, humanity spoke with one voice. The work began immediately. In laboratories around the world, scientists shared data that had been secret for decades. Military research was opened to civilian scientists. Corporate patents were suspended. Everyone who had ever worked on space technology, on energy systems, on communication devices, came together to solve the same problems. Dr. Lauren Webb, a physicist at MIT, led a team that worked without sleep for 2 weeks. Their goal was simple but seemed impossible. They wanted to understand how the Conclave's faster-than-light communication worked. The aliens had assumed this technology would take humans centuries to figure out. Lauren and her team did it in 14 days. It is based on quantum entanglement, Lauren explained during a video call with the Global Science Council. But they have found a way to stabilize the connection across vast distances. The mathematics is complex, but the principle is elegant. We can build our own version. How long? Asked Nathan Price. If we have the resources and the people, we can have a working prototype in 10 days. You will have everything you need. In shipyards across the planet, workers built around the clock. Old cargo ships were modified. New vessels were constructed using designs that combined the best ideas from every nation. The International Space Station, once a symbol of limited cooperation, became the center of a massive construction effort. Admiral Chris Martinez, a former Navy commander who had been appointed to lead the new United Earth Defense Initiative, watched the progress from orbit. Ships that should have taken years to build were being completed in days. People were working harder than they had ever worked before, driven by something stronger than fear. They are not just building ships, Chris said to his second-in-command, a woman named Lieutenant Sandra Cole. They are building hope. Sandra nodded, but her face was worried. Sir, even if we build 1,000 ships, the Conclave's fleet is bigger and more advanced. If they decide to attack, we cannot stop them. Then we need to make sure they do not want to attack, or that attacking us costs more than they are willing to pay. Meanwhile, on the diplomatic front, Ambassador Daniel Carter was busy making friends. Not every species in the Conclave agreed with the Exile decision. Some had voted against it. Others had abstained, unwilling to support the decision, but too afraid to openly oppose it. Daniel reached out to all of them. The Velthari were the first to respond. They were an aquatic species. Their bodies adapted for life in deep oceans. They had faced discrimination from the Conclave for centuries, looked down upon because they were different. Daniel and Katie Morgan met with a Velthari representative in a secret location, a small moon at the edge of a neutral system. "Why should we help you?" the Velthari asked. Her name was Coordinator Seleth, and her voice came through a translation device that turned her underwater sounds into words. "If the Conclave discovers we are meeting, we will face punishment. Because this is not just about us," Katie said. She had prepared for this moment, studied every piece of information they had about Velthari history. "The Conclave exiled us because we are different, because they fear what we might become. How many times have they done the same to your people? How many of your colonies have been restricted? How many of your young ones have been told they cannot reach for the stars because the Conclave says so?" Seleth was quiet for a long moment. In her dark eyes, Daniel could see old pain and old anger. "If they can exile you today, they can exile anyone tomorrow," Daniel added. "We are not asking you to fight for us. We are asking you to stand with us. To say that the Conclave does not get to decide who is worthy and who is not. And if we stand with you? What then? Then we build something new, something better, a place where species are judged by their choices, not their biology, where cooperation is a choice, not a command. Seleth looked at them both for a long time. Finally, she spoke. The Velthari have survived by being careful, by not making enemies, by accepting our place. Daniel felt his heart sink. But perhaps, Seleth continued, it is time to stop merely surviving. Perhaps it is time to live. She extended one of her webbed hands. We will help you, humans. We will see what you can build. Daniel took her hand and shook it gently. Thank you, Coordinator. You will not regret this. As they left the meeting, Katie allowed herself a small smile. That is one ally. We need more. Then we get more. We have 18 days left. Every species that has ever been mistreated by the Conclave, every civilization that has dreamed of something better, we find them. We talk to them. We show them that there is another way. The 30 days passed quickly. Across the Sol system, humanity built and planned and prepared. Ships that should not exist took shape in orbit. Alliances that should have been impossible were formed in secret meetings. Technology that should have taken decades was developed in weeks. On the 30th day, humanity was ready. Not ready for war. Ready for something much more dangerous. Ready to change the rules. Part 3. The patrol fleet arrives. Fleet Commander Zyrith watched the Sol system grow larger on her display screen. She was an Arxelian, a species known for their military discipline and their absolute loyalty to the Conclave. Her body was covered in hard gray plates, and she had 6 eyes that could see in multiple spectrums at once. She commanded 47 warships. Each one was armed with weapons that could crack a planet in half. Each one carried crews who had trained for centuries in the art of war. The exile of humanity was supposed to be a simple mission. Arrive, establish a blockade, and make sure the primitive species never left their little corner of space. Report, Zyrith ordered, as her fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel. Her tactical officer, a young male named Kiris, studied his screens. The system is as expected, Commander. 1 habitable planet, 3rd from the star, minimal orbital infrastructure, a few small stations near their homeworld. No significant military presence detected. Zyrith allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The humans had apparently accepted their fate. Perhaps they had spent their 30 days arguing among themselves, as young species often did. Transmit the exile notice, she commanded. Let them know the blockade is now in effect. The message was sent. It was formal and final, a reminder that humanity was now cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Any ship that crossed the boundary would be destroyed. Any attempt to break the exile would be met with force. Zyrith expected silence, perhaps some angry words from their leaders, maybe a few futile protests. What she got was something entirely different. Exactly 1 hour after her message, every ship in her fleet received a transmission at the same moment. This should have been impossible. Human communication technology was primitive. They should not have been able to reach all her ships simultaneously. On her main screen appeared a human male. He was older, with short gray hair and a face that showed no fear. He wore a simple uniform with an emblem that Zyrith did not recognize, a picture of their planet as seen from space. This is Admiral Chris Martinez of the United Earth Defense Initiative, the human said. His voice was calm and steady. We have received your message. We have a response. Zyrith leaned forward, curious despite herself. What could these primitives possibly say? You have decided to exile humanity, Martinez continued. You have decided that we are not worthy of the stars. That is your choice. But you do not get to decide how we respond to that choice. The Sol system is our home. It belongs to us. And we will live here under our own rules, not yours. Arrogant words from a species with no fleet, Xyrith muttered. Then Kyrus made a sound of alarm. His hands moved quickly across his controls, and his eyes went wide with disbelief. Commander, we are detecting energy signatures, many of them, across the entire system. Show me. The tactical display changed, and Xyrith felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Surprise. Ships were appearing everywhere. They rose from behind asteroids where they had been hiding. They emerged from the shadows of moons and planets. They decloaked from stealth configurations that, while primitive, had been good enough to fool her sensors completely. Hundreds of ships, perhaps 1,000. Some were small, barely more than armed shuttles. Others were larger, converted cargo vessels that now carried weapons. A few were proper warships, sleek and dangerous. This is impossible, Xyrith said quietly. They did not have this fleet 30 days ago. They could not have built this in 30 days. Commander, her communications officer interrupted, we are receiving transmissions from multiple sources. Not from the humans, from other species. What? The Velthari are claiming sanctuary status for 3 human vessels that entered their space last week. The Korath Mining Consortium is asserting commercial interest in human trade goods. They say they have signed a preliminary trade agreement with Earth. The officer paused, her voice becoming uncertain. Commander, the Axiom Collective is requesting permission to establish a research exchange with the humans. They say human scientists have made discoveries that interest them. Xyrith stared at the display. The Axiom Collective was one of the most respected scientific groups in the galaxy. If they were interested in human research, that meant the humans had done something impressive. Admiral Martinez appeared on screen again. The Conclave may have exiled us, but we have not been idle. We have made friends. We have found others who do not believe the Conclave should decide which species are worthy and which are not. You cannot do this, Xyrith said, though she was no longer certain. The exile is law. The Conclave's word is absolute. Your law, your Conclave, not ours. Martinez showed no anger, no hatred, just calm certainty. We have no interest in conquest. We do not want war, but we will not be caged. Every species that wishes to deal with us fairly is welcome in our space. If you try to stop them, you will find that humans are very good at making things complicated. One of Xyrith's other officers spoke up. Commander, the Velthari are now claiming that any attack on the human fleet would be considered an act of aggression against their people. The Korath are saying the same. If we fire, we might start a war with multiple species at once. Xyrith felt the situation slipping out of her control. Her orders had been simple. Enforce the exile. Contain the humans. No one had told her what to do if the humans refused to be contained. No one had imagined that they could make alliances this quickly. Your move, Commander, Martinez said from the screen. You can try to enforce the exile. You can start a fight that will cost you ships and lives and possibly pull other species into conflict, or you can report back to the Conclave and let them decide what to do next. Xyrith was silent for a long moment. She was a warrior. She had fought in dozens of campaigns. She did not fear battle, but she was not a fool. Starting a war without orders, against a species that had allies and support, would be a disaster. It would make her responsible for whatever came next. Stand down, she ordered her fleet. Maintain position at the boundary. Do not fire unless fired upon. And the humans, Commander? Xyrith watched the human fleet on her display. They had not moved to attack. They had not threatened her ships. They had simply shown her that they would not be easy prey. We report to the Conclave, she said. This is no longer a simple exile. This is something else entirely. She looked at the image of Admiral Martinez, who was still watching from the screen with that same calm expression. Well played, human, she said quietly. Well played. On the bridge of the human flagship, Admiral Martinez let out a breath he had been holding for a long time. "Sir," Sandra Cole said, "they are standing down. They are not attacking." For now. Martinez looked at the Arxelian fleet on his own display. "This is not over. It is barely beginning. But we have bought ourselves time." "What do we do with that time?" Martinez smiled, though his eyes were tired. "We keep building. We keep making friends. And we show the galaxy that the Conclave is not the only choice." He turned to face his crew. "Today, humanity refused to accept its fate. Tomorrow, we start building a new future." The crew cheered, and for the first time since the Exile had been announced, there was hope on their faces. The Conclave had tried to cage humanity. Instead, they had given humans a reason to prove what they could really do. Part 4. The Council Fractures. The emergency session of the Galactic Conclave was the most heated in 3,000 years. The great hall that had once been silent with ancient dignity was now filled with angry voices and bitter accusations. High Arbiter Thesalax sat on his throne and watched the chaos with growing concern. What should have been a simple matter, the exile of a troublesome young species, had become something far more dangerous. The Arxelian representative stood at the central platform, his gray plates flushed with anger. "The humans have made a mockery of us. They have built a fleet. They have formed alliances with other species. They are ignoring the Exile completely, and we are doing nothing about it." "And what would you have us do?" the Velthari ambassador replied calmly. Her name was High Speaker Thessia, and she represented one of the species that had openly allied with humanity. "Attack them? Start a war that could spread across the galaxy? We should have destroyed them when we had the chance, before they became a threat." "A threat? They have threatened no one. They have built ships to defend their own space. They have made trade agreements with willing partners. That is not aggression. That is survival." The Arxelian pointed a clawed finger at her. "You are part of this betrayal. The Velthari have sided with the humans against the Conclave. This is treason." Thessia did not flinch. "Treason against what? Against laws that are designed to control us? Against a system that treats some species as worthy and others as problems to be contained? The Velthari have followed the Conclave's rules for 8,000 years, and what has it given us? Restrictions on our colonies, limits on our growth, the constant reminder that we are different and therefore lesser." "You knew the rules when you joined the Conclave." "We had no choice when we joined the Conclave. The choice was obey or be exiled, just like the humans, just like every other species that the Conclave decided was not good enough." Thesalax raised his hand for silence. The arguing stopped, but the tension in the hall remained. "The situation with humanity is concerning," Thesalax said slowly. "But it is not beyond repair. They are still a young species. Their alliances are fragile. If we apply the right pressure, they will eventually submit." "With respect, High Arbiter," Thessia said, "you do not understand humans. I have spoken with them. I have studied them. They do not submit. It is not in their nature. The more you push them, the harder they fight. Then we push harder. And risk a war that could tear the Conclave apart?" Thessia gestured around the hall. "Look at us. We are already divided. The exile of humanity was supposed to be a simple demonstration of our authority. Instead, it has shown the galaxy that our authority can be challenged." In a private room next to the main hall, Ambassador Daniel Carter was having his own meeting. He sat across from representatives of 17 different species, all of whom had expressed interest in what humanity was offering. Katie Morgan stood beside him, her tablet ready with information about each species, their concerns, and what they might want in return for their support. A Korath delegate spoke first. His body was made of something like living stone, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder. We have come because the humans offer something interesting. Trade without restrictions. Partnership without submission. But we need to understand what we are getting into. The Conclave has ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years, Daniel said. Their methods have brought stability, but also stagnation. How many new species have been welcomed into the community in the last 1,000 years? How many have been exiled or restricted or destroyed because they did not fit the Conclave's idea of what a proper civilization should be? Katie spoke up, her voice clear and confident. We did research on this. In the past 2,000 years, the Conclave has exiled 23 species. 4 of those were completely destroyed, not because they attacked anyone, not because they committed crimes, simply because the Conclave decided they were too dangerous to exist. The room was silent. Some of the delegates had not known this. Others had suspected but had never seen the evidence. We are proposing something different, Daniel continued. We call it the Open Door Coalition. The rules are simple. Membership is voluntary. No species is forced to join, and any species can leave whenever they want. Decisions are made together, by discussion and agreement, not by decree from above. And what about protection? Asked a delegate from a species Daniel did not recognize, a being made of crystalline structures that chimed softly as it moved. The Conclave provides military protection to its members. Can you offer the same? Not yet, Daniel admitted honestly. We are still building our strength. But here is the thing about the Conclave's protection. It is a cage. They protect you, but they also control you. They decide where you can go, what you can do, who you can trade with. Is that really protection? Or is it just a different kind of prison? The crystal being considered this. You speak well, human. But words are easy. Actions are what matter. Then watch our actions. We will not force anyone to join us. We will not threaten anyone who chooses to stay with the Conclave. All we ask is the chance to show that there is another way. One by one, the delegates agreed to continue talking. Some were ready to commit immediately. Others needed more time. But the seed had been planted. After the meeting, Katie and Daniel walked through the corridors of the station where they had gathered. 17 species, Katie said. That is more than I expected. It is a start, but we need more. The Conclave has hundreds of members. If we want to truly challenge their control, we need to show that a significant portion of the galaxy supports us. And if the Conclave decides to attack before we are ready? Daniel was quiet for a moment. It was the question that kept him awake at night. They were playing a dangerous game, challenging an empire that had ruled for thousands of years. If the Conclave decided that the Open Door Coalition was too much of a threat, they could crush it before it had a chance to grow. Then we fight, he said finally. Not to win, because we probably cannot win, but to make them pay such a high price that others will see it and wonder if the Conclave is really as powerful as it claims. Katie nodded. You think it will come to that? I hope not. I hope we can build something strong enough that the Conclave decides it is not worth the cost to destroy us. But hope is not a strategy. We need to be ready for anything. Back in the main hall, the Conclave session was ending without resolution. The delegates were too divided to agree on a response to the human situation. Some wanted immediate military action. Others counseled patience. A few quietly wondered if perhaps the humans had a point. As Thessalax watched the delegates file out, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time: uncertainty. The Conclave had faced challenges before: rebellions, uprisings, species that refused to accept their place. All of them had been dealt with. All of them had eventually submitted or been destroyed. But the humans were different. They did not fight like other species. They did not play by the expected rules. They made friends where they should have had only enemies. They built bridges where there should have been only walls. For the first time in thousands of years, Thessalax wondered if the Conclave had made a mistake. And he wondered if it was already too late to fix it. Part 5. The New Rules. 5 years had passed since the Conclave declared humanity's exile. The Sol system had changed beyond recognition. Where once there had been a single space station and a few scattered satellites, now there were hundreds of structures orbiting every planet. Mining operations in the asteroid belt ran day and night, pulling resources from the rocks to fuel the endless construction. Research stations circled the gas giants, studying their moons and developing new technologies. And at the center of it all, hanging in orbit above Earth like a second moon, was Unity Station. It was the largest structure humanity had ever built, a massive wheel of metal and glass, spinning slowly to create gravity for the thousands of people who lived and worked inside. It served as the headquarters of the Open Door Coalition, a place where species from across the galaxy could meet as equals. Admiral Chris Martinez, now retired from active duty, stood on the observation deck and watched the stars. His hair was whiter than it had been 5 years ago, and there were more lines on his face, but his eyes were still sharp. His successor, Admiral Megan Torres, walked up beside him. She was young for the position, barely 40, but she had proven herself in the difficult years since the exile. "The assembly is about to begin," she said. "They want you there for the opening." Martinez smiled slightly. "I am not important anymore. Just an old man who got lucky. You are the man who built our fleet in 30 days. The man who stared down the Arxelian patrol and did not blink. They call you the father of the defense initiative. I had a lot of help. And you had a vision. That matters." Torres gestured toward the central dome of the station where the assembly chamber was located. "Please, sir, it would mean a lot to the delegates and to the crew." Martinez nodded and followed her through the corridors of the station. They passed beings from dozens of different species, some walking on legs, others floating in anti-gravity fields, still others moving in ways that human eyes could barely follow. All of them had come here because they believed in something different than what the Conclave offered. The assembly chamber was enormous, designed to hold representatives from over 100 species. Today, 63 had sent delegates. Some were full members of the coalition, committed to its principles and willing to defend them. Others were observers, curious about this experiment but not yet ready to join. Ambassador Daniel Carter, now Secretary General of the Open Door Coalition, stood at the central podium. His hair had gone completely gray, and he walked with a slight limp from an injury he had taken during a crisis 2 years ago, but his voice was as strong as ever. "We gather today not as subjects of an empire," Daniel began, "but as partners in a common effort. Our coalition is built on simple ideas: mutual respect, voluntary cooperation, and the belief that every species has something valuable to offer." Katie Morgan watched from the side of the chamber. She was deputy secretary now, Daniel's right hand in the work of building this new organization. She thought about how far they had come. From that terrible day when the exile was announced, through the desperate scramble to find allies, to this moment when their coalition stood as a real alternative to the Conclave's rule. "We do not claim to be perfect," Daniel continued. "We will make mistakes. We will disagree with each other. There will be arguments and disputes and difficult decisions, but we will face them together as equals, and we will find our way forward, not because someone above us tells us what to do, but because we choose to work together." The delegates from the different species listened carefully. For many of them, this was still a strange idea. The galaxy had been ruled by the Conclave for so long that most could not imagine any other way. But the coalition was proof that another way was possible. Far from Unity Station, at the edge of Conclave territory, Commander Zyrith monitored the proceedings through long-range sensors. She had been reassigned to Border Patrol after her failure to enforce the Exile, a quiet punishment that kept her away from important duties. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Kiris, stood beside her as they watched the Coalition assembly on their display. 63 species, Kiris said quietly. More than last year. Xerath said nothing. She had spent 5 years watching the humans and their allies grow stronger. Every year, more species joined them. Every year, the Conclave's grip on the galaxy grew a little weaker. "They should not have succeeded," she said finally. "Everything we knew about species like them, everything our experience told us, said they would fail. They were too divided, too aggressive, too primitive. Perhaps our experience was wrong." Xerath turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" "The Conclave judges species by what they are, by their biology, their history, their potential for danger. The humans judge species by what they do, by their choices, by their actions." Kairos paused. "Maybe that is a better way to see things." Xerath was silent for a long moment. She had served the Conclave her entire life. She had believed in its mission, its rules, its judgment. But watching the Coalition grow, watching species that had been enemies learn to work together, she had begun to wonder. "Perhaps," she said at last, "perhaps it is." Back in the assembly chamber, Daniel Carter was finishing his speech. "The Conclave gave us a choice 5 years ago. Accept exile or face destruction. We chose neither. We made our own rules, and today we extend that choice to everyone in this galaxy who is willing to stand with us." He looked around the chamber, at the faces of beings from dozens of different worlds, all of them here because they wanted something better. "The stars do not belong to those who would keep them for themselves. The stars belong to all who have the courage to reach for them. Today, we reach together." The chamber erupted in sounds of approval from dozens of species, clicks and whistles and rumbles and chimes, all of them expressing the same thing: hope. Katie Morgan allowed herself a small smile. This was not the end of their story. There would be more challenges ahead. The Conclave was still powerful, still watching, still deciding whether to oppose the Coalition openly. There would be crises and conflicts and moments when everything they had built seemed ready to fall apart. But they had done something that no one had thought possible. They had taken an exile meant to isolate them and turned it into the foundation of something new. They had shown the galaxy that there was another way to live. The exile of Earth had been meant as a punishment. It had become a beginning. Outside the station, the stars shone cold and bright, filled with possibilities that humanity and their allies were only beginning to explore. The Conclave had tried to cage them. Instead, they had learned to fly, and they were just getting started.